Hi Lifegroups, hope you've had a bit of time off over the Easter period and looking forward to getting back to a bit of normality again this week. We're going to be looking at the whole area of lament again, which I spoke on a couple of weeks ago as part of our series on worship in the wilderness. And we've been looking, haven't we, over the past few weeks about how we can continue to worship God and live for Him when we're facing lots of difficulties and challenges, and when there's so much pain and brokenness in the world and in our own personal lives as well. And so how do we maintain our faith during those times? And one of those kind of tools, or one of those ways we can do that, is through this this area of lament. And so we looked at how lament is so unfamiliar to us. Is it's not something we talk about, sing lament songs, don't preach on much. But it was clearly an integral part of the prayer life and the worship life of the gathered community of believers in the Bible. They were very familiar with it. And so we looked a little bit at that. We looked at a definition of lament by a man called Mark Frogop, who wrote a book called Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, which is a great book. I'd highly recommend it. And he described lament as a prayer in pain that leads to trust. So it's a prayer language, it's a way of talking to God about things that are really painful, that are really difficult in life. But it leads us to a place of trusting and believing in Him. So we explored that a little. And then we looked at the 4 different stages of lament. So the first stage is to turn to God in prayer, to look to Him. Secondly, to bring your complaint, so to actually complain to God about the difficulties and the pain and the different situations that you're experiencing. Thirdly, is to ask boldly, so to ask God to step in and intervene. And fourth and finally, it's to choose to trust, so making a commitment to worship and to trust God, whatever the outcome of that prayer. And I looked particularly at the first 2 of those stages, so turning to prayer and the complaining. And Sam's going to follow on in a couple of weeks' time with the final 2 stages, looking at those in more detail. So I've got a few questions for us to discuss. And if you want to read Psalm 22 again, which was the psalm I based the sermon on, you could do that together now. And then my first question for you is relating to turning to prayer, the first stage. What else do we turn to when we're experiencing pain, when life is hard? Where else do we go when we're struggling? My second question for you is about complaint. So why do we find it so difficult to complain to God? Why doesn't it come naturally to us? I think you spend a moment just discussing those things. And that'd be great if you're able to just have a bit of a general discussion around the whole concept of lament, really. What's challenging about it? How does it fit into our gatherings, our life groups? Maybe discuss what some of your comebacks are. What about this? What about that? Perhaps have just a general chat about how you kind of feel about lament. And then finally, perhaps in pairs, you might like to discuss something that actually you're experiencing right now that's painful or difficult. It might be something really deep-seated, or it might be an everyday grief of life. We talked about how it's not necessarily always the really heavy, hard, painful things, but it might be the everyday stuff like frustrations at work or exhaustion from no sleep because children are up all night and that sort of thing. They can be as used as lament prayers as well, as much as the really, really heavy stuff. So maybe if you feel able to chat to someone in your group about something that's causing you pain right now, and then perhaps you could use the 4 stages of lament to pray that through together. So laying out the different complaints and asking God to step in, and then making a choice and choosing to trust Him through that. Or if you find that maybe a little bit too difficult or too personal, or vulnerable, perhaps you could do an individual prayer. So you could write something down, you could write your own lament prayer, Again, you could use Psalm 22 as a basis for that, as a guide, but looking at the 4 different stages and writing down your own complaints and asking God to step in. And then, yeah, it might be good to pray together about how we can better embrace those who are hurting, those in the church, those outside of the church, how we embrace those who are in our groups and in our gatherings who are suffering and in pain, and how we can use lament to help people feel like they have a place among us and a home with us, that we are able to mix celebration with sorrow and to walk that line together. So I hope those questions are helpful, and hope you have a good evening together. Bye for now.